First things first, a consensus from economists and business people that sound money has been potentially jeopardised by the amount of borrowing that will be required to fund those tax reductions that may lead to growth. What is the Karen take on the dangers of losing the reputation for sound money?
This is a turning point for our country and for our economy. For 15 years now, we've had barely any growth. We've had low productivity. And for the last 2.5 years, we have had the worst global crisis since the Second World War, with the pandemic followed by the sad war in Ukraine. So we've had to grapple with a lot as businesses, as an economy. And the government did its best during the pandemic, borrowing huge amounts of money that it didn't have. It had to borrow the £400 billion to save the economy. What I've said for a long time, going back to February 2021, to the Chancellor at the time, Rishi Sunak, I said, do not increase taxes, because increasing taxes will stifle our recovery and hamper growth. You need to prioritize growing this economy and helping businesses get out of this nightmare that we've been through. Sadly, he did not listen and just kept putting up taxes to the highest level in 70 years. So I think this budget that Kwasi Kwarteng has now announced, whether you want to call it a budget, a mini budget, is transformational, because this now puts growth front and center and saying we have to have a target for growth. This is something I personally have been saying for a long time. I've said 2.5%. That's the figure the government is using. And it's got to incentivize investment for that growth. And lowering taxes, reversing the national insurance tax, that national insurance is a tax on jobs. That's 1.25% multiplied by 2, because there's 1.25% employers, 1.25% employees. That's being reversed now. The corporation tax, putting that up in one swoop from 19% to 25%. Not only does that hit businesses, not only does that hit pensioners because it hits investments in the companies, it also hampers inward investment because it makes it less attractive for foreign investors to invest into the UK. So this budget is all about generating growth and encouraging inward investment to help that growth. What is the other choice, Alistair? The other choice, do we carry on with really high tax, with facing ourselves at a recession? The Chancellor says we're in recession. The Bank of England says we're in recession. It'll be proved when the figures are out. How do we get through this recession? How do we survive? The energy help that's been given to consumers and to businesses is excellent. I personally feel the government's actually going to have to go further in helping businesses survive this winter in terms of providing VAT cuts and providing business rates relief, and maybe even allowing them to delay their VAT and their tax bills to help them survive. Because these measures the government have announced are going to be fantastic in the medium and long term in making our economy much more competitive and generating growth. But in the short term, we've got to make sure that businesses and consumers survive this horrible period that we're looking ahead and the uncertainty that still exists while this horrible war in Ukraine persists.
Karen, I didn't interrupt consciously because I agree with every word that you've just said, and it, as always, a very thoughtful contribution from the sharp end as to what the economy requires, and thank you for that. And it did speak to my opening question about sound money. I want to look at the other side of the equation, and you hinted at it, but other people on the programme have underlined it, as it were. Let me remind you and folk at home that in 1989, you and a friend founded Cobra Beer in a flat in Fulham, took a deep breath, did it, made a bob or two, and well done you. Will this budget unleash a new generation of like-minded men and women, and will the other measures on the supply side, like investment zones, free ports and the rest of it, create an environment where your successors will thrive?
Absolutely. That's the whole idea of this budget. This is a business-friendly budget. It is fantastic. And when people say, well, the budget is not helping people across the board, it's not progressive enough, well, yes, perhaps you've still got this fiscal drag. You've got the thresholds when you start paying tax. That he hasn't touched that. Those are not increasing in line with inflation. He could have done something about that. But on the other hand, the top 1% of taxpayers pay 30% of the tax. The top 10% of taxpayers pay 50% of the tax. So we already have a very progressive tax system. Reducing the top rate from 45%, which has been an anomaly, by the way, it's higher than most other countries. It was only put up because Gordon Brown, just before he stopped being Prime Minister, put up 40% to 50%. Otherwise, through Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Tony Blair, and most of Gordon Brown's premiership, we had a top rate of tax of 40%. That's where it should be. Bringing the tax rate down from 20% to 19%, instead of Rishi saying, I'll do it in 2024 just before an election, we need the help right now. So all this is absolutely right. The measures that are being taken to encourage investment is absolutely spot on. And most importantly, I know as a business that this gives me the confidence that I've got a government on side who wants to promote entrepreneurship, wants to promote investment, wants to promote growth, because it's that growth that's going to generate the jobs. It's those jobs that are going to pay the taxes. It's those taxes going to pay down the debt. And by the way, everyone's talking about increasing debt. Let's put this into perspective. After the Second World War, the last major global crisis on this level, debt to GDP went up to 250%. It took us until 1963 to bring it down to 100%. Now our debt to GDP, even after all these measures, possibly over 100 billion from the energy and the tax cuts, is not even going to touch 100%. We're well below most other G7 countries. America's debt to GDP is 160%. So we've still got a lot of headroom to go. And to me, the priority is I've got to survive. I've got to make sure businesses survive and consumers don't suffer.
Karen, if we have more time, we talk about Japan as well, but we're into our last minute, and I want to go back and give you the last minute. You said return to VAT, that needs to come down as well. You and I both know there will be another major, it will be a real budget in the early part of next year. In addition to VAT, give me the other two absolute top Karen priorities for Kwasi Kwarteng to put in that budget.
Yes, I think, by the way, that budget could be as early as November. It may not have to wait until the spring of next year. And I think there should be a November budget, and in that, take stock of what we've done just now. The pound is weakened, and by the way, the pound weakening is not good news. It's good news for exporters. We want to encourage exports. It makes our exports much more competitive. But we as a country are net importers, so it makes all our imports much more expensive. So we need to make sure the pound strengthens as well. But most importantly, we need to look in November to what measures can we have to help businesses survive this winter. And if that means reducing VAT, let's do it. If that means allowing businesses to delay their taxes, to improve their cash flows, to have access to government-backed loans, let's do it to make sure businesses survive.